Inshallah, we'll begin with the recitation of the Holy Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إن الذين عملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون كما يكذب ممكن تلك الله لا إله إلا الله
Since it's a Thursday night, before we begin, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all the marhum mu'minin and mu'minat, Muslim and Muslimat. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من شر الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله والحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين والصلاة والسلام وتحية والإكرام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله وعترته وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم وغاصب حقوقهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية أمير المؤمنين وأولاده المعصومين. أما بعد, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The intent was to have the program live, but unfortunately, the plan was to have it outdoors, and with the rain in the area, we were forced to move it online. Inshallah, next week we will attempt to have it in person at the same location. If you're gonna go then, if you're gonna talk, you can go. Okay. But it's an important reminder for us as a community that inshallah we have to make progress and move forward with regard to our building project and securing our location so that we're able to conduct our majalis and our programs and our gatherings in person, since the pandemic is starting to wrap up and wind down, inshallah. This past few days, we commemorated the birth of our 8th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. And since we didn't have a program to commemorate his wiladat, we just had the picnic. I just thought we'd take a few minutes of our time and visit some of the teachings and messages that our 8th Imam alayhi salam has given us, and use them as reminders for ourselves and for our self-development. We have the narration from Shaykh Saduq rahmatullah alayhi. He narrates in his book Al-Khisal from our 8th Imam, and this narration is mentioned in other books as well. Going through his chain of narrators to our 8th Imam, to Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam, the Imam says, قال رضا عليه السلام إن الله عز وجل أمر بثلاثة مقرون بها ثلاثة أخرى. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded 3 things which are conditional upon 3 other things. And then he says, أمر بالصلاة والزكاة فَمَنْ صَلَّى وَلَمْ يُزَكِّ لَمْ تُقَبَّلْ مِنْهُ الصَّلَاةُ وَأَمَرَ بِالشُّكْرِ لَهُ وَلِوَالِدَيْهِ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَشْكُرْ وَالِدَيْهِ لَمْ يَشْكُرْ اللَّهَ وَأَمَرَ بِإِتْقَاءِ اللَّهِ وَصِلَةِ الرَّحْمِ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَصِلْ رَحْمِهِ لَمْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. So the Imam is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this narration, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded three things and made them conditional upon three other things. The first one is that Allah has commanded us to perform prayer, but He has made that conditional with zakat, with charity. Therefore, whoever does not give charity, then that person's namaz, that person's prayer is not accepted. The second thing is that Allah has commanded us to be thankful to Him and to show gratitude to Him. But whoever shows gratitude to Allah but does not show gratitude to his or her parents, then that gratitude is not accepted in regard to Allah either. And the third thing is that Allah has commanded us to have taqwa, to have consciousness toward Him, and He has commanded us to have silat al-rahim, to have good relations with our womb relatives. And therefore, whoever does not maintain silat rahim, whoever does not maintain good relations with their family members, then as if that person does not have taqwa and consciousness toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a very powerful, very interesting, very famous narration that we have from our eighth Imam alayhi salam. And there's a couple of different things that we can take from this narration. The first point about the narration in itself, and not just each of the specific sections, but the narration itself, it's interesting that the relationship with Allah is linked to our relationship with His servants. Because if we look at the three things that the Imam is describing, they all have to do with our relationship with God. So prayer has to do with my relationship with God. Thankfulness, gratitude, shukr to Allah has to do with my relationship with God. And taqwa has to do with my relationship with God. But each of these three things that connect us and God are contingent upon things that connect us with people. So prayer, which is between me and God, is contingent upon charity, which is between me and people. Gratitude to Allah, which is between me and God, is contingent upon me having gratitude toward my parents, which is between me and creatures of God. And taqwa, which is between me and God, is contingent upon silat al-rahim, which is between me and other creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very interesting that these three pillars, which are in many ways very essential aspects of our faith and our relationship with God, so prayer and gratitude and taqwa, are all connected to our relationship with other servants of God. And that's a good reminder that, Islam is a very social religion. There's a lot of emphasis on social relationships and our relationships with each other, and that really in what this narration is affirming, similar to many other such narrations and verses that we have, that the relationship with God is incomplete, or the relationship with God will not really come to fruition if there are shortcomings in our relationship with the servants of God. In other words, the haqqullah cannot be fully fulfilled if the haqqun nas, if the right of Allah cannot be fully fulfilled, if the right of the people upon us is not being fully performed. So let's look at each of these briefly, and then inshallah we will move to the program for Dua Kumayl. The first thing that the Imam mentions is that Allah has commanded prayer and charity, and therefore whoever prays, it's not saying that person doesn't pray. Whoever prays, they do their namaz. فَمَنْ صَلَّى وَلَمْ يَزَكْ. The person who prays, but they do not give in charity, they do not give in sadaqah, they do not give in zakat, then their prayer, their namaz is not accepted. It's interesting because, when you look at the Quran, compared to how in some of our cultures, how we pair certain acts of worship, right? So in Urdu and in Farsi speaking cultures, we always talk about namaz roza or roza namaz, right? We always pair prayer and fasting, right? And then we talk about those as examples of good deeds, or as examples of ibadat and worship, right? Roza namaz, namaz roza. But the Quran doesn't pair prayer and fasting. Rather, we know wherever you see the Quran mention prayer, it is mentioning zakat, it's mentioning charity. So this concept of roza namaz, maybe we use it in our common language, and maybe that's okay. But it's important that the Quran does not see those two together as examples of religiosity or as examples of ibadat. Quran doesn't put prayer and fasting together like that. The Quran puts prayer and charity together as examples of complementary ibadat, as examples of related acts of worship that go together with each other. So there's much to be, there's not a whole lot that we need to say about the importance of charity. It's something that we all know is mentioned in throughout the Quran. It's mentioned in the narrations. It's mentioned in the examples of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. One aspect of this idea of zakat, of this aspect of charity, that's important to mention, and that's especially in light of our masjid and our building project, I just want to highlight is there's different aspects of charity. And when giving in charity, when giving in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's important to remember and think about the impact of my charity, right? So let's use an example. If I give, for example, let's say $50. So I have $50 to give in charity, and I give that $50 to feed a family of 5 or 6, whatever it costs for, let's say $8, $10 for a meal per person in the United States, and from a restaurant. And so for $50, you can feed a family, maybe feed them 2-3 times, depending on if you buy groceries for them, right? So the impact of the $50 that I give in direct assistance to a needy person, it'll feed them maybe once, twice, 3 times, 4 or 5 times, depending on the cost of the supplies and the groceries. But once that money has run out, now the impact is over, right? I fed them, and there's certainly a reward that I received for that act, but that was a time-bound act. Right now, that act is complete. The money ran out. They ate. They had those meals, and now they're done eating them. Versus, let's say I take that $50 and now I give it for the translation of an Islamic book. I give it toward a cause whereby Islam is being served. So for example, if I were to give that $50 and donate it toward the cost of translating, for example, a children's book into English, now it's not like the $50 I gave to feed some people, because that $50 was limited to the 3, 4, 5 meals that they could afford with that money. The $50 that I give toward the translation of a book is now money that every time that a child benefits or anyone benefits from reading that book, I will continue to receive the reward, right? And this is what we call the concept of sadaqah jariyah, a continuous act of charity. And so similarly, when it comes to giving money in any sort of cause where Islam is being served, where the religion of God is being served, we should remember that the reward there is continuous for as long as that benefit can be derived, and then it becomes exponentially increased, right? So for example, if I do take that $50 and now give it to the construction of a new masjid, so even if my $50 was just enough for the small patch of carpet that was put on the floor, but someone came to the masjid and they sat there and they benefited from the program, they benefited from the lecture, and this person had a transformative experience, now I get the reward for that person and every person who came and benefited from that masjid. Not only that, but now let's say that that person was transformed. So they go back home, they become a better Muslim. It doesn't happen in one masjid program, but over time, coming to the masjid, that person becomes transformed, becomes a better Muslim. They go back home, they start doing their prayers on time, they're treating their family members better, they do better tarbiyat and upbringing of their children. Now their children become better mu'mineen. So all of that is this domino effect of like interlinked good deeds that were all enabled as a result of me giving that $50 toward the building of the masjid. So it's very important that we recognize that as much as we can, we contribute toward these kind of sadaqah jariyah type of projects, right? Projects that are not just one and done or one-time effort, but rather money that will continue to benefit 100 years after I might have died because of the compound effect, because of this sort of domino effect that my contribution has created. So it's really important that we keep in mind that the Quran is telling us and the Imam is telling us that namaz, of course, we know namaz is wajib, namaz is obligatory, but that obligatory wajib namaz, which is a pillar of our faith, the namaz about which we are told in narrations that on the day of judgment, if your namaz is not accepted, everything else is not accepted. Right? That's how critical namaz is. That's how critical prayer is. But here the Imam is saying the person who does not give charity, then their namaz will not be accepted. So it really underlines and emphasizes to us the important and critical role of spending for the sake of God, and especially that we try to prioritize that spending toward causes and projects that will be not just one-time projects, but rather sadaqah jariyah, that will be a continuous source of benefit and blessing for us in the hereafter. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The next portion that the Imam mentions, he says, وَأَمَرَ بِالشُّكْرِ لَهُ وَلِوَالِدَيْنِ. He says that Allah has commanded us to be grateful to Him and to our parents. Therefore, the one who does not show gratitude toward his or her parents is as if he or she has not shown gratitude toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, this is just like the first verse, the first example. This is also a reference to the Holy Quran, specifically to Surah Luqman, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Anishkuruli wali walidaik ilayya al-masir. Allah says in the Holy Quran that you should thank me and you should thank your parents. Ilayya al-masir. It's a very ominous warning, right? Allah says, thank me and your parents, ilayya al-masir. To me is your return. Right? Like there's that warning given right after that verse, without any interruption, without any like pauses, without even a wa. And no, thank me and your parents, to me is your return. Like Allah is very stern in warning us in regard to our parents, that don't forget that you are going to come back to me. And in other words, this gratitude toward our parents and how we treat our parents is linked to ilayya al-masir. You're going to come back to me. You're going to answer for all your actions. Therefore, make sure you show gratitude toward your parents. It's a very stern warning there in Surah Luqman. And it makes sense because we know that Allah, of course, is the Khaliq and the Raziq, and He's the source of all the blessings and bounties we have in life. But what is the channel? What is the mechanism? What is the vehicle that Allah uses to transfer and to provide those blessings to us? It is through our parents. And that's why, right after mentioning be thankful, the Quran says, ilayya al-masir. And that's why we see that, the Prophet himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, لما سئل عن حق الوالدين على والدهما, he was asked give us a small summary. Concisely explain for us what is the right of the parents upon the children. And so look at the very short and to the point and concise explanation that the Prophet gives us. He says, Huma jannatuka wa naruka. That's it. He says, they are your heaven or they are your hell. No explanation, nothing further, nothing elaborate, nothing complicated, nothing very long-winded. Simple, but very eye-opening for us, I hope. Huma jannatuka wa naruka. They are your heaven, they are your hell. Meaning how you treat them, how you behave with them, how you act with them, how you show gratitude toward them, how you obey them. That's what's going to determine your heaven or your hell. It's going to determine your path in the hereafter. And usually when we see a verse like this, right, especially when we have the programs in person, we see the parents become very excited and they're always vigorously shaking their heads, and then because we think it's about our teenagers and how they talk back to us and they're rude to us, and did you hear what the brother said in the lecture, and that kind of reaction. But the real test of this verse is not when we are teenagers, right? Because even though that has its own issues, the verse is talking about being grateful to our parents. When I'm a teenager and I don't talk back to my parents, is that really an issue of being grateful? Not really, because they're paying my bills, they're paying for my cars, they're buying me new clothes and shoes and whatnot. So I better show gratitude, because otherwise they're going to cut me off next week. So the real test of gratitude to parents is not when I'm a teenager. The real test of thankfulness comes when they have nothing against us. When they are powerless in front of us, when we are adults and our parents have become elderly, that's when the real test of gratitude comes in. Because if I'm 17 years old, if I'm 15 years old, I better be grateful to my parents, because I know it's in self-interest. If I'm not grateful, if I'm not constantly being polite and saying thank you to them, they'll take away stuff from me. So that's not the real test the Quran is talking about. The test that the Quran is talking about gratitude to our parents is when we are adults, when we have the income, when we have the ability to help them, when we're the ones taking care of them, and they're completely powerless and they're elderly. That's when the real test of showing gratitude to our parents comes in. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Isra, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَنْ لَا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. He says, and your Lord has commanded that you worship no one except Him, and that you must do ihsan to your parents. You must show kindness to your parents. You must show goodness to your parents. إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرِ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, again, right as soon as He mentions obeying Him and worshiping Him, He says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and do goodness to your parents. And then the verse continues, if either of them reaches old age, then lower your wings in submission toward them, and do not even say uff to them, or in English we'd say ugh to them, but rather, and do not be disrespectful toward them, and rather speak to them a noble word, speak to them in a noble manner. When the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam were asked to explain what is this ayat talking about, what does this verse mean, can you give us a tafsir? Our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, he says, في قوله تعالى وَاخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذِّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ, the Imam says, here's what Allah is telling you to do. لا تملأ عينيك من النظر إليهما إلا برحمة ورقة. He says, don't ever even look at them except that you have a look of rahmat in your eyes. Meaning, even when you're looking at the face of your parents, and look at them with a look of mercy. وَلَا تَرْفَعْ صَوْتَكَ فَوْقَ أَصْوَاتِهِمَا. And never raise your voice, your volume higher than their volume. وَلَا يَدَكَ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمَا. And never raise your hand above their hand. Meaning, if they're about to do something, if they're going to do something, don't try to go ahead of them. وَلَا تَقَدَّمْ قُدَّامَهُمَا. And don't even walk ahead of them, even walk a few steps behind your parents. Right? We all know the example of Uwais Qarani, who wanted to come and visit the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina, but because he was forced to take care of his elderly mother, he's not able to, and he tries many times. Eventually, once his mother gives him the ability and the permission to go, but she makes the condition that come back before a certain time, before nightfall, or before period of time that she has given him. So he goes to Medina, and when he gets there, he realizes that the Prophet is not in town. So he waits for a little bit. This is the once in a lifetime opportunity that he has. And the Prophet doesn't come back in time. So he knows he has to keep his mother pleased. He leaves. And this person is given the status of companion of the Prophet ﷺ, even though he was never even able to visit once in person with the Prophet. And the narration says that when the Prophet returned back to Medina, he says, "Inni ashammu ra'ihat ar-Rahman min qabl al-Yaman." The Prophet says, I can smell the fragrance of the Rahman, of the merciful God, coming from the direction of Yemen, meaning the direction that Uwais Qarani came from. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enshrouded this person in his mercy, in his rahmat, because of how he was so good with his mother. And then the last point that our eighth Imam alayhi salam mentions in this narration is وَأَمَرَ بِاتِّقَاءِ اللَّهِ وَصِلَةِ الرَّحْمِ, that Allah has commanded us to have taqwa, but He has paired it with silat al-rahim. He has paired it with goodness to our family members. فَمَنْ لَمْ يُصِلْ رَحْمَهُ لَمْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Therefore, whoever does not maintain good relations with their family members, it is as if this person doesn't have taqwa, doesn't have virtue and God consciousness. And again, this is a reference to the Holy Quran. It's a verse of Surah An-Nisa. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. Allah says in the Quran that have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you will be asked about, and be mindful toward your arham, be mindful toward your blood relatives. So having taqwa, having God consciousness, and living a life of obedience to Allah is placed next to doing silat al-rahim. It's very deep, very beautiful, right? Silat al-rahim, the word sila means a tie, a connection. Rahim means what? Rahim means womb, right? The rahim of a mother. Interestingly, Rahim is the root of God's names, Rahman and Rahim. Right? Allah is using the analogy of the womb to explain how encompassing and how unconditional His mercy is. It's just like the mercy of a mother toward the child. But we know that there's a difference, right? And this is where it comes back to this topic of Silat Rahim. We know that Allah is Rahman, and we know that Allah is Rahim. Both of those come from the term Rahim. So we know that there's a difference. We translate it in English, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, the most kind, the most generous. Those are not, really the correct translations of Rahman and Rahim, right? The correct, accurate translation of Rahman and Rahim, they both mean the one who is merciful, the one who's the source of Rahmah. Rahman is translated, would be the best way to translate it, would be the one that's the source of general Rahmah, unconditional mercy. Right? So when Allah is Rahman to you and I, but Allah is also Rahman to, someone who's an agnostic, someone who's an atheist, even someone who's anti-religion, anti-God, they're still recipients of Allah's general mercy. Allah is still showing some mercy toward, even the likes of, when they were alive, people like Fir'aun, people like Yazid, people like Namrud, when they were alive, they were still receiving some level of Allah's rahmah. Because without that, they would cease to exist. Right? You need the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma inni as'aluka bi rahmatika allati, that we're just going to recite in a few minutes. Wasi'at kulla shay. It is the foundation upon which all of existence rests upon. So Rahman means the one who's the source of general mercy. But then we also know Allah is Rahim, which means that He has a special, significant mercy and significant rahmat toward those who are mu'mineen. So Allah is Rahman toward all of creation, but He is Rahim, particularly and special mercy toward those who are mu'mineen, who are believers, who love Allah and the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So we can apply the same concept of Allah being Rahman toward everyone and Rahim being toward the mu'mineen. We can apply this concept to Silat al-Rahim. Because when it comes to Silat al-Rahim, basically Allah is saying that for a family member who behaves well with you, right? They're good with you, they're kind to you, they're generous with you, they have good relations with you, then yes, you should be Rahim, meaning you should have a special level of kindness and love toward them, right? You should be Rahim with those who are good to you. But even when someone has been evil to you, even those family members who treat you badly, remember that Allah might not be Rahim to everyone, but Allah is still Rahman to them. So He's still a source of general mercy to them, even to the Namrud and the Fir'auns and the Yazids of the time. Therefore, even when it comes to family members who are bad to us, who treat us poorly, who are rude, who are disrespectful, who don't fulfill their rights toward us, we don't have to be Rahim to them, but we must still be, at a minimum, Rahman toward them. We must still show a general level of mercy, a general level of fulfillment of our responsibilities toward those people. And there is certainly a vast number of narrations and admonitions that we have from the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam in regard to this topic. One of the many interesting narrations that people would wonder and question, what does this really mean, is the narration which says that the person who does qat'i rahim, the person who cuts off ties with their family members, their lifespan is decreased, right? Their life is shortened. And the person who maintains silat al-rahim, who maintains good ties with their family members, their lifespan is expanded and increased. And people used to wonder, including myself, like, what is the relationship there? But it's very interesting. I read an article a few years ago, I think it was on the BBC or some mainstream news site, but it was talking about how one of the greatest predictors of longevity of life from a sociological and psychological perspective is what kind of connections you have with your family members. So people who broke off ties with their family members, people who are loners, people who don't spend time with their family, or who have gotten into fights and irreconcilable differences with their family members, those people generally tend to die earlier. Whereas one of the predictors of longevity, one of the predictors of living longer, was the fact that you had a happy and healthy relationship with your family and extended family. Right? And it makes sense, right? Because if you think about when you do qat'i rahim, when you break off ties with people, right? Like, it leads to stress, it leads to tension, it leads to emotional, health problems, it leads to, blood pressure and hypertension and heart disease and all of these kind of issues. So it makes sense why having a good, positive, healthy network of people around you would contribute to a long life, and why cutting off ties and adversely affecting your mental health in that way will cause your lifespan to decrease. So in our own lifetime, we've seen that this is one of these predictions that are made in the narrations, that Silat al-Rahim is related to longevity of our lives. And now we're seeing there's a psychological research that's actually confirming this point as well. So inshallah, there's certainly much more to be said on this topic, but in the interest of time, we will conclude. Just to recap, the narration from our 8th Imam alayhi salam, which is mentioned in Al-Khisal, is the Imam is saying that Allah has commanded 3 things, but He has made those 3 things conditional on 3 other things. So He has commanded prayer, but He has made that prayer conditional on charity. Therefore, the one who prays but does not give charity, then their prayer is not accepted. Number 2, that Allah has commanded gratitude to Him and to our parents. Therefore, the one who does not show gratitude to their parents is as if he has not shown gratitude to Allah. And the 3rd, that Allah has commanded taqwa and God consciousness, and He has commanded kindness to our relatives. Therefore, the one who does not have good relations with their relatives, that person does not have good taqwa and good relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala either. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that may He give us the strength and the ability to implement these teachings of our Imams alayhimus salam. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that may He grant us the ziyarat of Imam Ali ibn Musa alayhi salam in this dunya, and may Allah grant us His intercession in the next. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات اللهم تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك غافر الذنب والخطيئات إنك على كل شيء قدير وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته أنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته عظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكروك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أغلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد عملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنذر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي وغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاءك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات، أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحة وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب. يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي. فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها ضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته. فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات على مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك. وهبني يا إلهي صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النذر إلى كرامتك. أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك. فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأذجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج العاملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يحرق لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتغلغل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه أم كيف تزجر زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وغذيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدأ وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيته فبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته، أو إحسان فضلته، أو بر نشرته، أو رزق بسطته، أو ذنب تغفره، أو خطأ تستره. يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب. يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بذري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا رب يا رب يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة، وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها بردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي. يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب يا رب. قض على خدمتك جوارحي، واشتد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك، والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، فأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم من منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. فجد لي بجودك، واعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني عثرتي، واغفر زلتي. فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا رب نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا رب مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء، وذكره شفاء، وطاعته غنى. يرحم من رأس ماله الرجاء، وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم. صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله. وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله، وسلم تسليما كثيرا. زيارة الوالد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والبتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة. لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. فأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي. وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. بأبي أنت وأمي يا ابن رسول الله. بأبي أنت وأمي يا أبا عبد الله. لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل السماوات والأرض. فلعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتهيأت لقتالك. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، قصدت حرمك فأتيت إلى مشهدك. أسأل الله بالشأن الذي لك عنده وبالمحل الذي لك لديه أن يصلي على محمد وآل محمد وأن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 رحم الله من